nice setting for our forum, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a little more intimate. Something to think about. Well, we are on the waning time of our adult forums for this year, and we're planning for next year already. The next week is our last forum, and it's going to be an interesting tabletop discussion. There'll be no fighting next week, no voices raised. So that's just a little warning. Today, our topic is how to prepare for and respond to medical emergency while traveling. Dr. Jim Martenson is speaking to us today. He's a longtime Zumbo member, as most of you know. He's a graduate of the University of Washington School of Medicine. He was there when I was in grad school there.
Oh.
Really different subject area, so our paths didn't cross, to the best of my knowledge. Anyway, he joined the Mayo Clinic in 1985. Think about how long that is. He retired in 2018. That was a long Mayo Clinic career in oncology and radiology. Jim and his wife Cindy. Where's Cindy?
She said she'd already heard this. She'd rather visit with her friends.
All right. They've been married since he finished medical school. And, yeah?
The month before I started medical school.
Oh, since he graduated from college, maybe?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. And in this long career of medicine, he and Cindy have traveled a lot. And unfortunately, an emergency on one of those trips resulted in an air evacuation. And so Jim is going to bring us tips for the thing that you hope you never have to exercise.
Thank you. Let's put this on. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Do I have to do something here? I don't want to press the wrong button. I'll let somebody who does this for a living do that.
Yeah, this is.
Is that good? Yes.
Yeah, good.
Hey. All right. So the original title of this was, instead of saying while traveling, it said requiring air evacuation, and that's the one I think you saw in the various things the church put out. And I changed it to this because while the emphasis will be on how to be prepared in case that thing happens, almost everything I say applies to other situations having to do with travel. So why is this important for Christians? So Christians travel for service. Probably, I mean, I've certainly done that. Cindy's done that. Most of us have done that. If you haven't, that's okay, obviously. Christians go on religious pilgrimages. They go to Israel, they go to Wittenberg. I come out of an Episcopal tradition, and so many, many years ago we went to Canterbury Cathedral, which is an important site for that religious tradition because of its association with St. Thomas Becket. But I think, and I'm really gonna emphasize this at the end, regardless of our reasons for traveling, we have a responsibility to travel in a manner that honors Matthew 22:39, which is to love your neighbor. So just a few disclosures. I'm gonna talk about a few specific products. These are not endorsements of those products. These are provided as examples. My guess is that there are better products than the ones I will show, but they're just examples. And then I did get Cindy's permission to discuss our personal experiences related to this topic. So during an active travel vacation in Italy, Cindy experienced major physical trauma. We were on a bicycle trip and she fell. She ended up in an Italian hospital in the small town of Umbertide, Italy. And what followed was an education in how to respond to this difficult situation. And I'll be particularly emphasizing on what you need to do before it happens to prepare for an air evacuation. I will say that I was completely, I was prepared, but not intentionally so. I just happened to have done the things and some things were done for me that mostly prepared me for this. So what do you need to be ready? You need a smartphone on either an iPad or other computer device. So you need 2 devices. And the reason is that, as I'll talk about, I was on the phone, so Cindy was the injured one. I was in a hotel about 20 miles away from her, and there was a reason for that. And she got hurt on a Thursday, and we did not get evacuated out till Sunday. And during that time, I was on the phone constantly. There's a lot of people you need to be talking to if this happens to your loved one. So, and I was doing things like providing information regarding my bank's routing number and my checking account number. And it was way easier to have, the bank account information up here and be typing it into another screen here, right? Rather than have one device and you're kind of trying to go back and forth. So having 2 devices is very helpful. You obviously, if you're not here or in a country similar to ours, you need 2 universal plugs that can handle devices that draw both small and large amounts of current. Although you really probably will only need to draw small amounts of current for this purposes. And then you need spare batteries to keep these electronic devices continuously charged, right? Because when you're on your iPhone or your other smartphone, it's just way easier to work with it if it's not plugged into charging. It's way easier. So I have, and I didn't bring it today, I apologize, but I actually have a case that goes with my phone, and you can get one for, I think, for just about any phone, that doubles as a battery. So I could have that plugged in here, and then charging the phone, and when the phone was charged up, I could take that case off and plug it into the wall current and keep my device continuously charged without having a wire going into my phone. And you can do the same thing with your iPad or your other computer device. So this is an example. We just got back from a trip and we had 2 of these with us, and I decided I needed one more. You actually can't get this one anymore, but Brookstone has a new and improved one that I ordered when we got back because I decided we need 3 of them. And this is, again, I don't even know if you can get this anymore, but this is an example of a spare battery. There's tons of them out there. But I would bring at least 2 for each device. Excuse me, I did something. So when I first did this, I said download Skype before you leave for your trip and load it with about $10 worth of credit. And the reason I said that is we got there and I had not done that. And this was before cell phone companies provided widespread coverage. So in order to be able to make phone calls, I needed to be in a place that had Wi-Fi, which is why I was in a hotel 20 miles from Cindy, actually. And I needed to be able to make calls over Wi-Fi. Well, in that time, I needed Skype for that. Unfortunately, if you're in Europe and that happens to you, it's a catch-22 if you don't have another way of connecting with your phone, because what does Skype do when you sign up for it? It sends you a code that you need to enter in. So I was able to do it because one of the guys on our trip, we just had the message sent to his phone and then I copied it into mine. I was able to download Skype. Or probably more likely in 2022, make sure that you have the ability to make lots of phone calls. A lot of plans now, bullet point number 2 here, cell phone plans now, our cell phone plan, we can do Wi-Fi calling without the need to download Skype. We can, and we can, you can set up a plan, cell phone plan for foreign travel if you want. So take a clearly legible photo of the page with, and again, this is specifically for passport travel, for international travel, but take a clearly legible photo of the page with your passport number from your passport of all members of your trip and keep them on all of your cell phones, not just yours, but all members of your party. You might be the one that gets hurt. And the reason for that is, just as an example, so Cindy ended up being evacuated on a medical jet. And I found out very quickly that we were each allowed one small carry-on piece, and that was it. So I had to arrange, and this is one of the things that kept me on the phone for hours and hours, I had to arrange for our luggage to be transported home. And as a result of that, that luggage company wanted pictures of our passport. And it's way easier to have done it at home. I was having, again, cell phones are so much better now than even 5 or 10 years ago. It's probably much easier to take a picture there, right then and there, but it's probably way easier to just have done it before you left. And the jet company wanted it, the hospital wanted it. Lots and lots of people wanted copies of our, a digital copy of our passport. And then it's probably a good idea to also have hard copies of all your loved ones' passports. So the hospital wanted my bank address, routing number, and our bank account. Probably easiest to just take a check with you, but again, it's way easier if you don't have to look that up ahead of time. It was kind of funny because she was in this Italian hospital, and they were very insistent. They were making a very big deal about getting paid, which I'm sure foreigners come into this hospital all the time, and they never end up getting paid for their services, right? So I said, great, I'm happy to pay you. How much is it? I'll pay you right now if you want. And they said, no, we need to figure some stuff out, but we'll get back to you in a few days. It was 6 months before they got back to me. Anyway, but they wanted to know all this information. Insurance card or other insurance information, pen and paper to keep track of information. You may need to create passwords along the way. It's easier to just have a pen and piece of paper to jot this down. And the name and contact information for a luggage transport company. I used a company called Luggage Forward because, again, only a single carry-on was allowed during our trip. So check your insurance policy, and this is the first example of how I was not really prepared, but someone had done the preparation for me. So I work for Mayo, and Mayo has an air evacuation policy for all their staff employees, and I believe all their employees, but I'd have to double check that. But make sure you have it, right? And I hadn't. It just so happened that you get that, and it's not part of it's not likely that it's part of your health insurance policy if you have it. It's a separate policy. Being not part of health insurance policy, right? It's not regulated by any of the laws that govern health insurance policies. I mean, they need to get their money, right? And they're not coming for you unless they are assured that they will, or you have a policy in place beforehand. So this is this happens to be the product that we had. This is the one that Mayo uses. For people who are retired, you can get this. For people who are retired from Mayo, you can get this for $35 a year for each person. But more ordinarily, it will cost you about $385 per year. If you want to sign up for an annual plan, it's probably gone up a bit since I made this, but this is one company. This is a company that does it on a per trip basis. But you know, the cost of that jet was probably somewhere in the mid to high 5 figures to low 6 figures. I don't know what it cost. Even if you have that kind of money, even if you would be able to afford that, from a little town from Umbertide, Italy, it may be difficult for you to mobilize those resources. It's much easier if it's in place ahead of time and you can just make the phone call and they're going to come get you. They wanted medication lists, allergies, past medical history for all members of your family. Again, it's way easier if you have that ahead of time. Make sure that you have a good supply of medication for everyone. We just bring everything now. We used to put them in those little pill boxes that go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. Now we just bring everything because you never know, especially during a pandemic, when you might get stuck somewhere and be staying much longer than you anticipated. remember the jet, and they really emphasized this to me when I was talking to the company in preparation for our journey. They emphasized the jet is an ambulance. It's not an emergency room. It's not a small clinic. It's not a hospital. So they are going to rely on your supply of medication for anything that you need to be taking to a very large extent. It's good to have some cash. That's true anytime you're traveling. And you know, we now sort of think ahead about what we're going to do, who gets information. And what we decided, we have 3 grown adult children, and we decided not to tell them until we got home. That was a personal decision. We just figured it was something that they would worry about. But kind of think about how you want to go about that. The funny thing about that is now I have to give my children, because we didn't tell them, now I have to give them daily updates. I don't know if that was a good idea or not. But kind of think about what your strategy is going to be. Understand something as basic as how to activate the what phone number to call. And again, I didn't know. I called the. I have a friend. I don't know if anybody knows him. His name is Scott Stafford, and he is a Naval Academy graduate, and he is the man to call when you have. I mean, he's not an emergency room physician. He's another radiation oncologist. He is the man to call when you've got a problem. Almost any problem. In fact, I'll give you his phone number afterwards. But so I called him, and he knew he had some buddies up in orthopedic surgery and so on. And so think about how you're going to contact various people, and how you're going to activate air evacuation if it's necessary. Now I'm going to talk about COVID. And this obviously didn't apply to us because this didn't happen to us, but it applied on another journey to us that I'll talk about in a moment. So think about getting tested before you travel. And keep in mind that you can be completely asymptomatic and still be infected, right? Get vaccinated and have a plan for how you will document that you are COVID negative prior to return from international travel. So we just got back from another bicycle trip. So has anybody done this, by the way? Has anybody come back from international travel? And so you have to, right now, and I think I'm a huge believer in masks during spikes in the pandemic, vaccination, testing. I personally think that maybe testing for Americans coming back is maybe a little silly. We can talk about that if people are interested, but you have to do it. And so you can actually set that up ahead of time and do it right from your hotel room. Do it, it's a proctored test, and there are a lot of different companies. There's FlowFlex that does it. And then when we got there, so we came home on a Monday. You have to do it the day before, not 24 hours before, within the day of or the day before. It can be more than 24 hours as long as it's within that time frame. And so, we were coming home on a Monday, and we got tested on Sunday morning at 8 o'clock. But before we got tested, I went up to the hotel, just people at the check-in desk, and I said, where's a place, we were in Brussels. I said, where's a place in Brussels that's close to here where I can get a COVID test? If I need to, for purposes of traveling back to the United States. And she gave it to me. It was 800 yards from where we were. And I did that just in case plan A fell through. If somehow the connection didn't get made, as it turned out, it went off without a hitch, and it was no big deal. And then have an idea of what you will do if you become infected during travel. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Because depending on where you are, you may be in quarantine. And you may both be in quarantine. So one of the reasons a lot of this is relevant is that, and one of the reasons why I think it may be a good idea to get tested, even if you're asymptomatic, 1 or 2 times before you go, is that about 2 weeks after COVID symptoms, 50% of people will still have a positive test. And you can see that from this diagram here. And you can see that even out at a month, some people are still COVID positive, even though they're not infected, they're not infectious, they're not symptomatic. And does anybody know kind of what the outer limits of this is by any chance? How long at the sort of worst case scenario can you remain test positive after being infected by COVID? Anybody? You can be positive for 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
So that's an extreme case. You'd be like 1% of people, but it's possible. And so why is this relevant? So here's what the CDC says. The CDC says that you must have a negative test the day before or the day of your return to the United States. Or if you have recently had COVID, you may instead travel with documentation by a healthcare provider of recovery from COVID-19. And within this requirement, I looked to see what the time frame is for this second criterion here, and I couldn't find it within the requirement itself. So I looked elsewhere, and elsewhere, the minimum amount of time that's going to need, that your healthcare provider probably won't sign a letter saying you've recovered unless it's been at least 5 days since you were infected. And it may be longer, but that's probably the minimum time based on other CDC guidelines. So, on our bicycle trip, we were required to be to test prior to returning to the United States. So we decided to get tested at both 2 weeks and 6 days prior to travel. Again, because it's possible to be infected and not have symptoms. A, it's probably not a bad idea just by itself, but B, if you get tested 2 weeks before, right, you're positive and you're asymptomatic, let's just say, to take an example, 5 days later or 10 days later, go to your doctor and say, I was, maybe get a PCR test at the Mayo Clinic or Olmsted or some other healthcare facility to get sort of medical record level documentation. Then go to your doctor and say, I've completely recovered. The doctor writes you a note, your trip is saved because you went on, because you got tested, right? And now you don't have, the good news is, the bad news is that you were infected with coronavirus. The good news is you don't need to do all that testing to come back. All you need to do is hand the person the note. So if you test positive for coronavirus prior to a trip, you may still have time to recover and see a physician or other healthcare provider to provide documentation of recovery, even though you still may have a persistent positive test. So it may save your trip. And it's probably not a bad idea. The second thing is to get vaccinated. And I'm gonna, maybe it's a little bit of a risk, but this is the New England Journal article for the abstract from the New England Journal article describing the results of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, the mRNA vaccine. I encourage everyone here to read it. You don't need to understand all the technical jargon. I actually don't. In fact, I bet that there are very few people who understand all the intricacies of how the mRNA vaccine was made, all the basic science behind it. You don't need to understand any of that to understand this article and others similar to it. And really, it comes down to just a few lines. So I don't know how legible this is, but I'll give you the numbers. So there were 43,548 participants who underwent randomization, and half of them got placebo, and half of them got the vaccine. And to be clear, there are no mirrors, no tricks. Everybody who's participating in the study understands that there's a 50-50 chance that they're going to get either the active agent or the placebo. When at the time of reporting of this study, there were 8 cases of COVID-19 with onset at least 7 days after the second dose among the participants who received the vaccine. 8 cases. There were 162 among the placebo group. So you hear, when you do the math, that's 95% effectiveness. So it reduced the chance of getting COVID by 95%. Moreover, there were, it virtually eliminated the possibility of hospitalization or death. And that's also in the abstract. But again, it's actually a pretty interesting study to read. It's, for those in medicine will understand, this is an absolutely magnificent accomplishment, that they were able to pull this off in less than a year. So I have personally been the principal investigator for several randomized clinical trials of a few hundred patients. And those studies were an absolutely monumental amount of work. This is a study that's several hundred times the complexity and the number of patients, and the fact that they were able to pull this off in this time frame was a spectacular accomplishment. And same thing for the Moderna. This is a very interesting figure from the same study, and you'll see so forget the figure up in the upper left-hand corner for a moment, but you can see that the blue is the placebo group, and the red is the vaccinated group. And what you can see is that this is the number of cases in terms of percentage of the total group, and it's a small number in both groups. But you can see that this is after the first dose. We hear it said that you don't really get full protection until after the second dose. Actually, about 12 days after after getting the first dose, you are pretty well protected. And you can see that there's an absolutely unequivocal separation in the number of people who are getting infected about 12 days after the vaccination has occurred. And this just shows the same thing, sort of blowing up that separation, and you can see there can't be any question about what's going on. So the Moderna and the Pfizer BioNTech are mRNA vaccines. And what does that actually mean? Well, the coronavirus has a spike protein that is critical to their function. It's the little red spiky thing sticking out. In fact, it's called coronavirus because it's a reference to a crown. And the spike is critical to the function of it's what allows the virus to attach to a cell and do what it does. So here's how the mRNA vaccines work. The mRNA, so they managed to figure out the molecular coding, how they figured out how the portion of the virus that tells the body to make just the spike protein, not the virus as a whole. So the mRNA, the messenger, and it's an information molecule. So the M stands for messenger. So the messenger RNA molecules carry information that instruct our cells to function properly. So we all have mRNA working in our bodies all the time that basically serves as an information transfer mechanism. Coronavirus mRNA vaccines carry information that instructs our cells to make just the spike protein. And our bodies then see the spike protein as foreign and prime our immune system to attack anything carrying the spike protein. It was an astonishing medical accomplishment to complete vaccine studies within about a year after discovery of the virus that causes COVID-19. I mean, literally, because I am 95% retired, but I work a little bit still. And so as a result, as a healthcare worker, and I guess an officially old person now, I actually got my invitation to go get vaccinated on December 24th, 2020, yeah. So I was one of the very first people to do it. Just a little bit more about this. So the ability to understand how mRNA works and how to make these proteins was it just happened to be the case that a lot of basic laboratory work had been done prior to development of this whole process that allowed companies like Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna to hit the ground running. And that was one of the major reasons why this was able to be accomplished so quickly. Brand new technology never done before. So, and now we're going to get into a little bit about why I think this is especially pertinent to us as Christians. So mRNA vaccines reduce transmission by about 87 to 95%, and this is another study that looked at that. So this is looking at transmission reduction. And the numbers work about the same way as the numbers in that abstract I showed you. So the vaccine, so we can look at a high-risk contact and their vaccinated status. And you can look at an index case, the person who has it, by their vaccine status. And if you can see, like, for example, if your high-risk contact has, oh, don't do that. If your high-risk contact has been vaccinated with Pfizer, and the person who has a breakthrough case has also been vaccinated with Pfizer, transmission is reduced by 90%. I mean, a very impressive number. And so to kind of make this personal, this happened to us also. How do you like that? We were on another trip, and Cindy got COVID, and she had been vaccinated. And because we didn't figure it out for a while, I was in absolutely very, very close contact with her during her most infectious phase, right? So I am the high-risk contact, and I had been vaccinated with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And Cindy was the index case, the person infected with a breakthrough case, and she had been vaccinated by the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And so my risk of getting the COVID from her was reduced by 90%, okay? So the data is pretty solid that you do reduce transmission. So let's look at two other possibilities. If only Cindy, the vaccinated person, had been vaccinated, there would have been a 61% reduction in the risk of transmission to me. So if she had been not vaccinated, I had been vaccinated, all of a sudden she is has a much more transmissible virus. If only I had been vaccinated, sorry, I have this wrong. Sorry. I apologize for this. So if the bottom line, I can't remember which way this is supposed to go. If only one person is vaccinated, the chance of transmission is somewhere between 61 to 74%. And I apologize for the error in the slide. But because we were both vaccinated, as I said before, the risk of reduction was 90%. And again, despite the fact that I was in close contact with Cindy for several days while she was infectious, I never became infected with coronavirus. So how is this data relevant to our faith? Well, from my perspective, we can talk about the things that Jesus asked us to believe. But in terms of our day-to-day lives, how we live our lives day in and day out, to me, Christianity is extremely simple. It's not complicated because in terms of how we live our lives from day to day, Jesus asked us to love God and love our neighbor. And to me, going through the relatively trivial inconvenience and discomfort of getting vaccinated is an utterly basic manifestation of loving our neighbor. And it was interesting to me to listen to one of the opening prayers this morning, and it said, you say love everyone all the time. That's so hard. But we trust that your love can change the world. Use us to make that change as we practice patience, put others first, and listen with open hearts. And I was struck by, in the context of the talk that I was going to give, about the fact that it said, loving others is so hard. This is not an example of that, right? This is easy. This is an easy thing to do. Unfortunately, I suspect I'm preaching to the converted here. So this is an easy thing to do. I mean, I get a little bit of a sore arm. The worst that I've seen, we've had a few of our loved ones have kind of felt under. I get a good night's sleep actually the next day because I feel tired. That's about as bad as it gets for me. I know some people go through much more significant discomfort, but even that discomfort is nothing compared to the discomfort that you could experience from getting COVID. And more importantly, from our perspective of caring for others, it's just such an easy thing to do, and it's not hard. And if we can't do this, then I'm not sure what we're about in our day-to-day lives. So what about the idea that the vaccines become less protective over time? Well, this is some data from the Centers for Disease Control. I pulled it off the internet on Thursday. So this is the most up-to-date information that I could find from a, from my perspective at least, an utterly reliable source. And this shows the Omicron spike, right? And this is rates of COVID-19 by vaccination status and booster dose. And the main thing you need to look at is the black curve is a completely unvaccinated person. And the dark blue curve, the curve at the bottom, is a vaccinated and boosted person. This is with just one booster dose, not two. And you can see that your risk of getting COVID is reduced by a factor of 3. So you're 66% less likely to get COVID if you've been vaccinated and boosted. Even more importantly, this is the risk of death. And the risk of death was reduced 20-fold for a vaccinated and boosted person. So if you have a question about whether the vaccination is still effective, this is literally hot off the press. This is as of Thursday. We'll probably see more data down the line. It takes a while to compile the data, which is why it doesn't cover up until May 15th. But I hope people find this convincing. Okay, what happens if you? What happens in the case of the fact in a situation where an emergency happens? So, if possible, take pertinent photos of imaging studies and forward them to your doctor. Get the one of the things I didn't do was I didn't get the phone number of the hospital where Cindy was. And that was like the first thing that the jet company, that the air evacuation company wanted to know. So like walk into the emergency room with your loved one or however you get there. And as soon as you're like, maybe even, I mean, they're gonna take care of your loved one. Well, before you forget it, walk up to somebody at the desk and say, could you please write the phone number of your hospital down? I didn't have it and I was having a heck of a time trying to find it. So get that right away. Be prepared to provide the basic information I've already talked about. Hopefully you've prepared and you can start doing that. I started carrying my essential documents at all times. You have to be ready to work in a system that is not the same as the one you're used to. The hospital she was in was, not the Mayo Clinic, not Olmsted Medical Group, but they did a really good job of taking care of her. I mean, they had a concrete floor. She actually stayed. I'm not sure why, but she stayed down in a little alcove and right adjacent to the emergency room at the time. Strike a balance between questioning the medical care and trusting the care providers. One of the things that happened was, so Cindy had pelvic fractures and a fractured hand, and they came up to me and they said, we need to anticoagulate her. I'm like, what? You gonna put her on blood thinner? She just had major trauma. So I called the Mayo Clinic and they said, yeah, that's what you do with the pelvic fracture. To be clear, I didn't say it to them. I'm saying that to myself. But if they were going to do something that's so sort of counterintuitive from my obviously non-emergency room perspective, and it was correct, then I knew that it was time to. I knew that she was under. That she was getting really good care. The other thing is that I assumed that at a place like a hospital with people with doctorate degrees and so on, everybody would speak English. Not so. Nobody spoke English. But we were with Backroads, and Backroads unbelievably kept behind one of their guides who were fluent in English at a cost of, I'm sure, several $1,000s to them. Talk about loving your neighbor. Anyway, they kept behind this guy for several days until he literally rode out to the airport with us and waited until we were on the flight, and was my transportation. I mean, it was amazing. And I said to them, this has to be costing you several $1,000s because he was due for another trip, and they had to move their guides around and stuff. They said, no, we got this. So anyway. Then understand that air evacuation may take several days. It's not that you simply call them and they're saying, yep, good to go, the plane's on the tarmac. And the plane didn't even leave until, again, this happened on a Thursday, they didn't even leave until Saturday. And it was a 17-hour plane trip. one-way. Talked to them early about resolving your bill. It's easy. I was pretty upset during this time, as you might imagine, and it's easy to forget to sleep, eat, and hydrate. And then bring some food for the jet. I have nothing but good things to say about the jet, except the food was really lousy. So I was glad I had some energy bars and so on. Consider paying for air evacuation before travel. In fact, I think it's, from my perspective, it's essential. Have at least 2 digital devices and a way to keep them constantly charged, copies of passports and other essential documents, get vaccinated before trial, considering getting tested for COVID prior to travel. Get the phone number and other pertinent information of the medical facility where your travel companion is hospitalized, and be prepared to provide pertinent medical information to the local and home hospital and air evacuation service. So I'd be happy to. So one thing I think I would emphasize is that I am not the final word on this. I suspect that that there are people that you collectively have had other experiences that. And other wisdom to share, so I thought we could have some questions, and also people could share their experiences and their insights into this topic.
Jim, how much did the clinic help you through this process?
Well, the clinic helped me a fair amount, but really you're dealing with the air evacuation company. I mean, they were ready when we landed in Rochester. I mean, we literally flew from Umbertidi to Ireland to Northern Canada to Rochester, and they were ready for her. The ambulance, and Cindy wasn't like at that point wasn't in a life-threatening situation, but she needed to be hospitalized for a day or 2. So they were ready, and the bottom line is I think that the air evacuation company and your hospital and so on are going to be talking to each other. It pretty much went off without a hitch.
How did you navigate customs in that whole piece?
It was really easy. I mean, like so that's why you need your passport on a phone. First of all, right? Because the jet company's going to want it. The luggage company that's going to bring home all your stuff is going to want it. There's just tons and tons of people. The hospital wants it. There's tons and tons of people who want that. But I'm trying to remember. I didn't get out of the plane in Ireland. I'm trying to remember if somebody came on board and wanted to see my passport. I did get out of the plane to stretch my legs in Canada. And it was on this like desolate airport in Canada, kind of like the Rochester airport. No. I mean, it was like custom person showed it to him. That's it. And then Rochester Airport has customs.
Yeah.
So it was like such a non-issue. It was absolutely no big deal.
And you had nothing with you.
Yeah, we didn't have much with us, right? I think you still have, like in our luggage coming home, we had to declare what was in that. But again, it was like it was really easy.
How does you said you had to get insurance, of course. So how did you contact them first too, or don't you have to really deal with the insurance?
So the question is, you had to get insurance or a policy, and how did I contact them? I didn't know. So I literally didn't know that I had this. I should have, but I didn't. I mean, I just had never thought of this before. I was in contact with the Mayo ER, and they knew who to call, and they told me who to call. But now, with the policy I carry this card that's got the phone number on the back, and that's the first place you call. I call.
So
Again,
that's for the insurance through Mayo?
So I don't know exactly how it works, but when you retire, Mayo provides, one of the benefits Mayo provides is that you pay this company $35 a year for each member of your family that you want to have covered by this policy, and you get it. That's like a tenfold reduction in what a policy would cost you. So there's some subsidy or something going on, I don't really understand exactly
I
how
wonder
it
if
works.
that's for staff, for medical staff, but I guess I'll have to check on it. Because I signed up for the Scotland choir trip, and we were talking about that choir practice on Wednesday about getting insurance, and I think it was Alan Hansen that mentioned Allianz is a good company, and that's different than the company that we're going through for the choir tour. And
Right.
Yeah.
so maybe I'll check at Mayo too and see.
Exactly. Yeah, check, because you may not need it at all. And it may be cheaper for you to get it on a per trip basis too.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing to be really sure of is understand what the service is.
Right.
So the service might be that you get transported to London and you're to the tertiary care medical center, and that's it. That's where the train stops. So, you don't, at least I don't want that. I want something that lands at RST.
Yeah.
And so, understand what you're buying and then that company will tell you how to access the service if it happens.
But if we weren't in your situation where you had contacts at Mayo that you could call, like the ER and stuff, I think my first instinct would be to call the insurance company. Does anybody else have?
No, but that is now
That's
who
who
I
you
would
would
call.
call.
I would
Okay.
call, and I don't even think of it as insurance. I think of it as like a contract, that if this happens, you can call it insurance, you can call it
Yeah.
whatever you want. But I don't call it, I think of it more as like a contract, that if A happens, then, if something bad happens, you come get us.
Okay.
I think the answer is that you call the insurance, the air evacuation company. But whoever you sign up with, that's part of what you should do, right? Talk to them, say, okay, if the worst happens, how do I activate this? And they will tell you, and they're probably just gonna say, hey, you got this card, look at the phone number on the back of that card. Yeah. Other questions, comments? Yes?
Your statistics showed that vaccines and boosters give you very good protection.
Yes.
You were talking about one booster?
So
The
these.
second question is about the second booster. What is the
Yeah,
second
yeah, no,
booster?
that's a super good question, and Ruth, Noel, anybody else, I invite you to chime in. So, this data that I showed you,
Predates the second booster last week.
back here, this predates the second booster. This is just with one booster. And you can see even if you don't get boosted, that's the dotted blue line, you still have really good protection, but I mean, why not go for 20-fold reduction in the risk of death?
But a second booster wouldn't.
Well, so the question, but this is, so one thing about presenting almost any medical data is it's historical, right? It's
Right.
what's happened in the past.
Right.
And so there was a study from Israel that looked at second booster. And just because of the way the statistics work, it gets harder and harder to show as more and more people have some level of immunity, either from having been infected or vaccinated or both. It gets harder and harder to prove that subsequent interventions are effective. But there was a really good paper from Israel that looked at second boosters, and compared to not having a second booster, the numbers looked pretty good. They were still pretty convincing. You're not looking at a 20-fold reduction because the number that they're comparing against is this. So I don't think that the science, in my opinion, I don't think the science is absolutely rock solid hard that you get a booster. I think that a reasonable, and again, Ruth, you can disagree with me on this, or Noel, or anyone. I don't think that I wouldn't necessarily hold it against a person to not get the second booster. But after having read the study from Israel, I chose to. And again, this is all with mRNA vaccine.
Yeah.
Ruth, what were you going to say?
I made the same decision, and really, Israel's the only country on a broad level that's given second boosters to their people, and they were a smaller population, but they're very well studied. And it just shows what you would expect in a way that over time, your sort of antibody levels start dropping down, and you get another booster, and they're going to go back up, and that's more sustained. And I mean, I think it's valuable, especially if you're at high risk or exposed a lot. I think it's worth it.
Do you think not getting
Well,
the second booster is a reasonable thing, or are you more adamant
I
than?
think it's reasonable.
Yeah.
And I chose to get one, but I have to be.
Why not?
Working in the center, there's not much downside to it.
Yeah.
And that's what I've heard too. The other thing that goes along with that is the possibility of picking up your second booster in the late summer, fall.
Yeah, it's
That's
timing.
another thing.
Timing could, you
And
know,
that the timing might be benefit too.
So
People
I
I know
looked
are
at-
trying to figure out, when might be the next
Right.
peak.
So I looked at that actually, and I looked at where the studies, so the sort of $64,000 question is, when are the Omicron specific boosters gonna be
Yeah,
here?
right.
Okay, because that's the one you really want. I think you really want the one that's available now too, but, and I started looking at it, and it looked to me, and again, if others have more recent information or different information, it looked to me like it's gonna be October or something before we get that Omicron, specific booster that probably will really ramp up the protection to a very high level. What you don't wanna do is having had a booster like in September, and then you're probably not gonna be eligible to get that Omicron booster that might be available in October or November for a while, maybe 4 months. But the way I looked at it, this was in April, I just did the math, and it's gonna be about that time frame. So getting a booster now shouldn't preclude you from getting a booster, the Omicron specific booster, when it comes available, presumptively in maybe October, November, December, something like that. That's how I looked at it. I really thought about that though, because I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, we should just add though that there's an increased number of COVID cases here right now. It's part of the reason I went back to wearing masks again, because I have several colleagues who are out sick right now. And I don't think people are getting really very ill, as there's still Omicron and that, but people are getting it. And I was involved in a lot of activities, graduations over the weekend, and I don't wanna be also the asymptomatic person with 2 boosters now, but potentially feeling fine, but potentially passing this on, because I've been exposed at work or somewhere, to other people, so it's, those are kind of considerations to think about it.
Do you know, is there any possible problem with getting boosters periodically? There shouldn't be.
So the question is, are there any possible problems with getting boosters periodically? There have been some theories by credible people who have said possibly, but I don't think that there's been any credible evidence that
It's hard to see what it would be.
Yeah, exactly.
Why?
And it depends on who you ask. I mean, there are some people who still say, mRNA vaccines are still experimental, I'm not getting one. That's just nonsense.
That is a real problem. Now we have probably a candidate for governor who is
Yeah.
Right.
a family practitioner.
Right.
Who is an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is so hard as you're trying to make these decisions and to help. The importance of vaccine is so well documented, and then to have someone say it's all trash.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just,
It's just beyond comprehension.
Yeah.
So,
it's beyond
Doctors got
comprehension.
and just related to that, can anybody,
Republican candidates or
Right.
something.
so there was a study done by Pew, came out in September. Does anybody know who the least vaccinated population is? Demographic.
Evangelical Christian.
White evangelical
White
Christians.
evangelical. Yeah.
So, does anybody know who the most vaccinated is? Who, the group that is best embodying Matthew 22?
Episcopalians?
Atheists.
Yeah.
Atheists are 90% vaccinated. And we, our demographic is about 70%. So it should be a challenge to us that atheists are doing a better job of embodying Matthew 22 than.
What it is a marker for what team you're on.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
That's a good
Maybe.
point.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, when you look at data like this is, you can only measure someone if they've gotten sick, right? So you don't measure the number of people that did get sick.
But you're not measuring the people that don't report that they're
Right.
sick.
Yeah.
I have to go back and look at the methodology for this, I don't have it at
But
the
there,
tip of my tongue.
you can't measure something that didn't happen, right? So if nobody got
Yeah, but there are a lot of people who've had COVID now more recently who aren't tested and aren't counted.
Right, that's
Yeah.
right.
Or they won't
Yeah.
test and they don't
Yeah.
remember.
And they're not
But
gonna show up.
remember,
So
this
it's
is
actually more
death,
protective than.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Remember, this
That
is
was
death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
death is a hard so, you know, no, seriously, so, in my business, we talked about, you know, like,
Oh, yeah, this is
disease-free
the other-
survival, you know, if you have cancer, you get treated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Disease-free survival is, whether you, when the cancer came back, that's considered an event, and the curve goes down when that happens. So, but disease-free survival is a soft endpoint. It's not that easy always to figure out, like, when an event like that happens. Death is much easier.
Yeah.
It's not 100%, but it's pretty good. So this is death.
Yeah.
And so I think for me at least, the curve before that, you might be able to do a little bit more questioning of, but I think this is pretty rock solid. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
My name is Sonia, and I've not personally met you before, but I have a deep desire to create a checklist of the information that you gave us, because I am also one of those choir members who's going to stop.
Right.
So are your slides available? So
I
that
will make them, I think,
We can. we'll see if
You've
we can
got
do
it,
that.
so, yeah.
Well, that'd be great.
and I need to get rid of that one, or at least fix that one slide.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just get rid of it.
But it's more I think what you all are looking for is more like, what do I need to remember before I go?
Yeah.
Less the data and more, what can I handle
Right.
for a trip?
Yeah.
So,
Take a
But the
look.
bullet points are there. You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
If you don't wanna read about mRNA vaccines,
No.
skip it.
Yeah.
I'm cool either way, but
Yeah.
thank you very much.
You
Yeah,
wanna
Yeah.
send me the update and then I'll.
Yeah, I'll just get rid of that one slide. I can do it right
Isn't it-
now. I can do it on this computer when
Okay.
we're done. And then you'll
Thank
have it.
you.
Now, I've got ivermectin in my dog's my dog's heartworm tablets, ivermectin, would that be useful?
So, what's interesting about ivermectin is that ivermectin has been the topic of a randomized clinical trial, and it is completely ineffective.
That's right.
The thing that's a little bit, so these things will have knock-on effects, right? And so, I don't know about right now, you were able to get ivermectin for your pet.
For a pet, yeah.
Yes.
It's called heart
But
guard.
there've been, for a while, it was really difficult for people raising animals, people with pets, whatever, to get ivermectin because, in my opinion, foolish people were like, I mean, where does this stuff come from? I'll just tell you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, but I mean, it's actually raises a serious point, Phil.
Yeah.
that-
Yes.
that,
Yes.
Yeah,
I don't know where it comes from, to answer your question.
yeah.
QAnon and all this other.
Well, people just
But where
start
did
to
they come up
brainstorm.
with something
I think people
that-
start to brainstorm and then they talk about it and then all of a sudden it becomes a fact.
Well, I mean, I'll just tell you, I will tell you the story, and I'll try to keep this as, I'll just tell you. So I do, short distance triathlons, and, I do short distance because I kind of stop having fun after about an hour and a half. But I was in Buffalo, Minnesota, and there was this gigantic flag flying. I mean, just picture a flag hung from a crane that was 60 feet by 40 feet.
Wow.
And from this flag, it basically said that JFK Jr. faked his own death, and that he was coming back to
Yeah.
be vice president
Right.
when the election, when the fraudulent election that we just experienced was fixed. I'm being sarcastic. And so I was just like, oh, it's like there are people that are sitting in a room that are going, what is the craziest possible thing we could think of? And let's just see if they'll believe it, and they put it out there. And ivermectin isn't quite as egregious as the JFK Jr. faked his own death thing, but it's getting up there.
Yeah.
It's pulled
But it's
muscle
a marker
from
for the
things.
team you're on.
Yeah, it's a marker for the team you're on. Unfortunately, it has
Yeah, yeah, right.
consequences for
Yes.
real people. Yeah.
Jim, I really appreciate the checklist. We're planning a trip to Guadalcanal.
Yeah.
And the company that's doing it required that we provide travel insurance information on and evacuation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the first time, I've traveled all my life. I traveled for work around the world, and for the first time, I'm buying a policy for my next trip.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just essential.
Of course, I'm also getting older.
And, I mean, the one that I have, I mean, one of, it actually was my very favorite trip of all time. We floated the Grand Canyon from Lee's Ferry to Phantom Ranch and then hiked out. And the company, that we did it with a company called Oars, which you definitely want to, if you want to stay alive, you do it with a company.
Yeah.
It's not dangerous if you do it with a company. But they said, do you have a company that will come get you by helicopter in the bottom of the Grand Canyon if something goes south?
Yeah.
And I called AirMed, and they said, yes, we will come get you.
Yeah.
So it's worth kind of understanding. That's what I mean when I say, like, understand what the service is that you're buying.
Yeah. Then you can relax.
Yeah.
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 Enid, I never used to worry about it either until I turned 65, and, you know, Medicare won't cover you once you're out of the country, so that's.
But you're supplemental.
Supplemental.
But it's the
Yeah.
Air-Evac is the
Yeah.
big,
Yeah.
is the big push.
I just have I have one other story to tell you. So, you know, Cindy, emergency room, x-rays, anticoagulation, kept in the hospital. The next day she was put in an ambulance again, went to a different hospital, was evaluated by an orthopedic surgeon, came back. You know, this all went from Thursday to Friday, or to Sunday. Anybody care to guess what that, so, and this wasn't covered by any insurance or anything. Anybody care to guess what that cost? May I have a bid, please? Anybody?
20 grand.
20,000. I hear 20,000, it was less than that.
Oh.
Probably more, 40,000.
No, it was less than
Less.
20,000.
It was less than?
Yeah, less than 20,000.
Do you mean your cost to you or?
This is
The cost,
Italy.
I had to
Let's
pay,
go
I had,
insurance.
this wasn't
Yeah.
Mayo covers like some catastrophic thing, but, so 20,000, okay, I need a low, this is opposite of an auction, we're gonna go down,
Yeah.
because we don't.
Seven.
What,
7,000.
7,000 lower, anybody?
Oh.
300.
$500.
It's Italy.
Yeah.
It's not the US.
Yeah. So, anyway, you can kind of think about that.
Wow, all right.
Well, thank you so much for. So how can I,